Welcome to the Speculations reading series, which I think started in the fall of 1995, which would make this our 22nd year.
Woohoo!
And we are continuing we're continuing monthly, mostly on Wednesdays, and Wednesday, October 26th, we're going to have John Calvin Rosmersky, and Wednesday, November 16th, Jason D. Whitman. And let's see. Sign our guest.
What about Arcana? Isn't there an Arcana reading?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. There's a small convention that many of us are affiliated with, our Arcana, which is a convention of the Dark Fantastic with guest of honor Kathy Koja, passing flyers for that out. And tonight we're pleased to have Catherine Lundoff. This is probably your fifth time in Speculations? Does that sound about right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
I've read here a lot.
You've read here a lot.
Like the swallows to Capistrano, I return.
Editor, critic, anthologist, short story writer, novelist, probably leaves this stuff out. But,
let's see, what else do I do?
Publisher.
Working on being a publisher, yes. This close.
So take it away, Catherine.
All right. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I am getting over an ear infection, so my ears are really stuffed up. If I'm at about this volume, can everybody in the back hear me okay?
Yes.
I will try to stay at that volume. If I am no longer at that volume, just sort of wave a hand, because I do actually look up periodically, so I'll know this. Okay. As usual, I'd like to thank Dreamhaven for hosting us once again. I have a couple of books here that are now collector's items because they are out of print. This is Haunted Hearts and Sapphic Shades, which is a collection of lesbian ghost stories that I edited a number of years ago. And it includes stories by a couple of local writers, including Elise Matheson and Ka Vang. And because this is the collector's edition, the art is actually by a local artist. There's a later edition with different artwork. So I used to write a lot of erotica under my own name. That was before Google. We're over that now. However, so this is also a collector's item because it's the last time any erotica is appearing under this name. All the new stuff shows up under Emily Byrne. Anyway, if you're interested in any of these things, please purchase them at the front desk, and I will be happy to sign them. I will pretty much sign almost anything, up to and including body parts, as long as they're things you could expose on primetime television. And that almost never, ever get asked to do that, and that's good. But every now and then, there's always a first one. All right, so what I'm going to do is I've got a slightly longer piece that I'm going to start with, and then I'm going to give you the option, depending on your attention span at that point, on whether or not you want the really short excerpt from the current novel in progress or the slightly longer short story that has never been unveiled before. So I'm working on a couple of new things. I just finished my first gaming tie-in project, which I can't announce yet because my part's been approved and nobody else's has been approved yet. But soon, so if you follow my author page on Facebook, I'll be announcing that hopefully within the next month or so. And one of the other things I'm working on is pulling together a new collection of my short stories. Actually, I'm working on pulling together 4 collections of my short stories, which gives you an idea of how much stuff there is floating around. And a couple of novels. I'm in the process of starting up my own small press called Queen of Swords, and I hope to, by the end of the year, I will have the first book out. It's it's been through edits. I'm going through the last stages of things before I send it off to be formatted and cover art and all that good stuff. So the story I'm going to start with is the story that's going to appear in that collection, which will be called Out of This World. It's called At Mother Laurie's House of Bliss, and it originally appeared in a very small press collection of fantasy stories about sex workers. So it had to be set in a fantasy milieu, as it were. The protagonist had to be a sex worker. It could not be erotica, and it could not have any explicit sexual content. And it came out from a small press called Harp Haven, and the collection is called Ladies of Trade Town. So this particular story is called At Mother Laurie's House of Bliss. Ran Herath, trusted right hand of the Sun Lord himself, was in a playful mood. There was a twinkle in his dark eyes that stood out despite the mask he wore to disguise his face each time he came to me. It amused him to think that he might hide behind it, as if Mother Laurie herself had not told me who he was when he first began to come to the house. I helped him slide off his heavy cloak, rich with the fur of some animal I'd never seen before. Then I knelt at his feet for a moment, reaching for his boots, as much to appear appropriately humble as to undress him. But he gestured me up onto the bed instead. This was new. I wondered with a mild mixture of boredom and apprehension what he wanted from me tonight. But I let none of that show in my face. Instead, I lay down and summoned my most welcoming boyish grin. Mother Laurie didn't like it if we didn't at least pretend to look enthusiastic, and her displeasure was not something I wanted to risk. Of course, privately, I wondered how enthusiastic she'd looked back when she was in my place. Back before one of her lovers, some wealthy son-born or other, gave her enough to set up her own house and give up lovers like Wren. But this wasn't the time to wonder about that too hard. Instead, I thought hopeful thoughts about how some of the other boys had told me that nobles like Wren sometimes left a jewel or two behind when they left, perhaps even enough to put aside for a house of my own someday once I bought my freedom. Thus far, he'd left me 3 gold pieces and some handfuls of silver, but nothing more valuable than that. Still, he kept coming back, and it was something to be able to say that one of the king's most trusted advisors was one of my lovers, or at least it would have been if I were allowed to talk about it. As it was, only Mother Laurie and I knew. I tilted my head back to show off the taut muscles in my neck and chest and thought about the virtue of discretion. It was at once the most valued and least appreciated of my skills. Wren gave an appreciative grumble from the foot of the bed. I worked on looking overcome with desire. In response, he tossed his sword and scabbard aside and smiled. "Aaron, you have served me well, perhaps begun to even earn my love. And since you have moved me, tonight I will favor you as I have favored no other. I shall read the poems that I have composed under the spell of your inspiration." He yanked a piece of parchment from the saddlebag that hung over the chair. Then he seized his gold-plated cup and downed the wine I had poured into it with what seemed like a single gulp. My seductive smile locked in place. Wren's poetry was not like the kind made by 2 men together, joined by love and lust, or not like any such poetry anyone was willing to pay me for. He also seemed to have forgotten that I had been present at Lady Eurydice's birthday celebration last month and well remembered his impulse to declaim there. The sidelong glances and smothered titters at his skill were startling in their openness, given his rank. Now I wished I had had the wit to pour myself a cup of the wine as well. Wren began to read from the parchment while I stilled my face to vapid admiration. His words were as foolish as I remembered them, and I wondered how long he planned to go on. I practiced drawing in my breath slowly and letting my body ease seductively back into the silken coverlets, as Mother Laurie had taught me when I first came to her. Then, Wren's voice faltered. He choked on his words and coughed, his shoulders shaking with the effort. I sat up. Surely this was more than bad verse. I watched in horror as his face paled beneath its normal dusky hue, and he gasped. His legs began to buckle, and he staggered. I uncoiled from the silken covers as fast as I could and rushed to his side, catching him as he collapsed. I lowered him slowly to the expensive carpet as he stared up at me, eyes rolling, a white foam pouring from his lips. "Sare! Sare! What is it? Marana!" I held for our witch. She would know what to do if she was within earshot. But no one came. His body convulsed, and then Sare-Ren-Harath, advisor to the king, noblest of the sun-born, went still in my arms. I placed him gently on the floor and ran, naked as I was, to the chamber door. I flung it wide. "Marana! Marana! Come at once!" Mother Laurie appeared in the doorway as if by magic, and I fell backward at her frown. I wondered if she'd been waiting outside. "What are you doing, fool? All that screaming will frighten off business." She stepped in as I retreated, stopping only when she could see Wren's body on the carpet. Then she pushed me aside, closed the door, and knelt next to him. Her hands were at his face, then his neck. I could see her broad features change as she realized what I feared. "Put some clothes on, boy, then fetch Marana." She seemed to think of something else. "And don't imagine that you can run from this house. I still hold your bond." An unpleasant glint shone in her blue eyes for a moment, and I shivered, my hand going to the nearly invisible silver collar around my neck. If she willed it, it would tighten like the grip of the king's executioner until I joined Ren-Harath in the lady's dark caves. I scrambled into my tunic and leggings and went down the stairs like I had wings, dodging the inquisitive hands of several older gentlemen and at least one lady in my passage. Marana was in the kitchen, as usual this time of night. She looked up from a smoking cup of something that the cook had just handed her, and I shivered despite myself. Looking into her cold, dark eyes, it was almost as if she knew what I would say before I said it. "It's Sir Harath! You've got to come! Mother Laurie's with him!" I gasped. She gave me an odd look before she rose and caught up her stick with one hand, my arm in the other. "Come, then." Her voice rumbled up from someplace deep below our feet. My legs began to shake as I looked at the cup the witch had just put down. Now I remembered who had poured Ren's wine. If he had been poisoned, I was doomed. I went limp in the witch's grasp. She yanked hard, pulling me back into reality. "Smile at the clients, Aaron. I don't know what's happened, but you're not in the king's dungeons yet." I stared at her, and she bared sharp, blackened teeth back at me. It brought no comfort. We were back in my room almost as fast as I had left it. Mother Laurie was sitting on a chair and studying Ren-Harath's body on the floor before her, a thoughtful look on her face. "Marana, do what you can, please." She and the witch exchanged odd, cool glances, and I shut the door, sealing us all in. I tried not to look down at Ren, and found myself instead looking at the parchment he had never finished reading. Unthinking, I reached toward it, only to have my hand knocked aside by the witch's staff. "Don't touch anything until I'm done," she barked. Nursing my knuckles, I watched her circle the body, leaning on her stick like she was pulling the boat of her body forward with it like a steersman's oar. The moon of her form eclipsed Mother Laurie's each time she moved, and I wondered if it was a portent of things to come. At least Mother Laurie was familiar. A witch exiled from the Lady's Temple in Idrinpur, on the other hand, was a stranger everywhere she went. Given the manner of sinister arts they taught there, I could not imagine what would be evil enough to result in being cast out, and a cold shiver crept over my flesh. Mother Laurie beckoned me over, making a circular gesture with one thick hand to indicate I should not get too close to the witch or Ren's body as I crossed the room, as if I needed encouragement. I nearly pressed myself through the walls and beyond as I circled around the macabre scene in the center of the room. As I went, I tried to read Mother Laurie's expressionless face. Would she throw me to the guards unheard? Was there a chance of proclaiming my innocence? I knelt at her feet when I reached her side and stared down at the thick carpet below my knee. I noticed that Ren's purse had fallen from the saddlebag and was now spilling its contents on the floor into the chair. He must have grabbed it when he fell. I wondered if I could reach it before the two women noticed it, seize it, and run for the street, bond or no bond. "You are a foolish young man, Aaron," Mother Laurie rumbled over my bent head. "The question is, how foolish?" I jerked back and stared at her. Always, I could read the men who came to me, very nearly knowing their thoughts, but this woman was a stone wall. What did she mean? She sighed, the movement shaking her big frame. "Did you know the Sayre's wine was tainted?" She scowled down at me as if reconsidering the phrasing of the question. "Did an enemy of the king persuade you to kill his minister?" My head shook like a marketplace puppet's. "No!" I stared up at her in horror, all the while thinking of reasons to want the man dead. Not my reasons, but reasons nonetheless. He had been rich and powerful, his heirs contending for his favor. The king's other favorites were replaced when he arrived at court. It was said that he had been the king's lover as well as that of other powerful Sunborn. Harath had been ruthless, sometimes cruel, and a dreadful poet. Any of these things, or perhaps all of them, might have been inspiration enough to kill him. Marana cleared her throat. Harath's body, the parchment, and the goblet all glowed for a moment. She murmured some words I didn't catch and then made a sweeping gesture with her hands. The glow gradually dimmed until all looked as it had before. The witch looked at Mother Laurie. Poison, as you guessed. Dragon's breath from the western mountains, I believe. I froze, my breath trapped behind my lips. I knew dragon's breath, as did every child in my village. The old women warned us away from its red flowers and deceptively sweet smell from the time we could walk. I wrapped my arms around my legs and lowered my head, a moan I could not halt leaping from my lips. There were no other horrors from my valley at Mother Laurie's house of bliss, or even elsewhere in the whole city of Hadrath that I knew of, and dragon's breath grew nowhere else in the Sun Lord's lands. My reaction had not gone unnoticed. Mirana, see if he speaks the truth about the Ser. Use your powers. Mother Laurie's voice was implacable, cold as the northern snows. I flinched away and she grabbed me by the shoulders, holding me still. Mirana held up her hands, rings flashing on her fingers, and whispered a phrase. I could see a dark pattern on her skin, and the lines of it moved like snakes. My bond circlet burned around my neck, and I screamed, the sound cut off by Mother Laurie's hand over my mouth. Silence, boy! It's this of the Sun Lord's torturers, and I want answers before I give you to them. Let Mirana do her work. The witch reached for me, the patterns writhing on her skin from her fingers down her arms. Her eyes were all black now, the magic of Idrinpur and perhaps something else filling her like a vessel. I knew that whatever it was, she would pour it into me and it would force me to tell her anything she wanted. And somehow it was familiar, but yet it should not be. Had someone done this to me before? When? I shoved back hard against Mother Laurie, my panic overriding my fear of death as I tried to yank myself free, but I was too slow. The witch's hand closed over my head, holding me in place. The pattern fell from the flesh of her hand, dropping over my face like a black net, and I screamed as I had not done since I was sold into bondage. I had sworn that no one would make me scream like that again, but I broke that oath without a second thought. The net tightened, its touch making my flesh flinch away from its tendrils, its knots. They quested out across my face until they covered it. I could feel my body bucking away from their unclean touch as they sank into my skin. My mind was no longer my own. From as far away as if she was still at the cook's table in the kitchen, I heard Mirana's voice. You will speak the truth, Aaron. Anything less will mean your death. I tried to look at her from behind the veil that covered my face, but I could not move. I heard the truth in her words, though, fearing only my own answers. Did you desire Harath's death? I heard my lips form a whispered no, and I went limp with relief. That much at least was true. What whore desires their best client dead if he has not been cruel? Do you remember anyone speaking to you of his death? My lips formed another no. And yet, someone had done this or this to me before, perhaps even given me orders. Who knew what they had spoken of? My no was a greater effort this time. There was a stillness in the room. There was a rushing in my ears as though I swam in a river with only the net holding me in place. Then she spoke again. Did you put poison in the goblet? My no froze on my lips this time. Instead, to my utter and complete horror, I heard myself say, yes. A tear, then another rolled down my cheek under the webs that covered it. How could I have done such a thing and not remembered it? Again, there was silence in the room, and neither Mother Laurie nor Mirana spoke for a moment. It's settled. We give him to the guards with a confession. Mother Laurie's voice was implacable and cold. I wondered if she was disappointed in me, her finest pupil. I wonder if I was disappointed in myself. Mirana's voice came again, and it echoed with the lady's power. Wait, there is more he has not said. I can feel it. Mother Laurie snorted. I doubt it. Remember that your powers are not what they might have been if you had stayed in Idrinpur. I pay you for hedge witcheries, keeping the whores free of disease and babies. Divining the whole truth of anything is work for a fully trained witch. The webs retreated a little. Not enough to free me, but enough for me to see their faces clearly again. Mother Laurie looked contemptuous, and Mirana looked at as if the fires of the lady's caves were burning in her eyes. When the witch spoke again, her tone was full of winter's frost. But of course, mistress. The guards will not think it at all amiss that a bond whore, held by your hand, was able to act on his own to murder Sir Ren Harath. No one will suspect you of any involvement. The breath hissed between Mother Laurie's lips, and I could feel her hands tighten on my head and shoulder. She had held me thus when my collar was fastened, just before my training began. My flesh remembered that day as if it had been only moments ago rather than 6 long years. Some part of me fought free, and I mouthed, "I'm innocent, innocent," into the room, though I knew no one would hear me. Finally, Mother Laurie spoke again. "Then you must prove me free of this crime as well. Otherwise, everyone in this house is likely to die along with me. You are right in thinking they will not believe he acted alone." Marana gave her an odd smile, black teeth hidden this time. She reached toward me once more, and the webs pulled away from my face, leaving me gasping for breath. Neither one paid me any heed as the witch turned back toward the body. This time, she placed her staff in the bowl of the goblet. Nothing happened for so long that I thought she was asleep. Finally, she growled, "There is magic here, but it is from long ago." "How long, witch? Is every goblet in the house corrupted? Shall I have them all brought?" Mother Laurie's voice was tense, but she released my head, shifting her grip to my other shoulder. Marana leaned down and held her hand just above the goblet's bowl, being careful not to touch it. Perhaps 3 moons, maybe more. Whatever the spell was, it seemed simple. So simple it should have dissipated by now. She was frowning. I found myself wondering why a spell would simply vanish. Weren't they supposed to last? Then I wondered what else a witch might learn at Idrinpur on her way to completing his or her studies. It mattered little to me now, of course. Marana was only trying to prove herself and Mother Laurie clean of my crime. I was doomed no matter what. Despite my terrors, I curled my toes around a gold piece and began to slide it slowly sideways under one of the chairs. Perhaps a chance for escape would present itself. Marana turned again to Herath's body, and I could feel Laurie stir restlessly behind me. Soon I knew that the Sayre's servants would come to look for him. He would never stay the night here. If they didn't see him when they came, they would call the guards. Maybe, I ventured cautiously, the goblet was poisoned in the kitchen. They both stared at me as if I should have been unable to speak. Marana nodded slowly. "It's possible. Do you remember fetching it?" I frowned and tried to weed through my thoughts. Where did the goblet come from? I looked at it hard as if hoping it would answer my questions. I remember one of the kitchen boys bringing it and the wine before Ser Herath came. I couldn't remember which boy it had been, though. I tried until my head ached. Marana looked at me, and I could tell her magic still held me. He speaks the truth on this. I went limp with relief. Maybe I hadn't poisoned Herath, at least not intentionally. Not that the Sun Lord's executioner would care. If I was to free myself, I had to find another to take my place. I dragged my memory back to before Herath walked through the door. The boy. Was he black-haired, or was it more silver, like the Eastern nomads? My life might hang on the answer. I remembered that he seemed familiar, but I recalled all the boys I knew by name, matching a face to each, and none of them was the right one. Is there anyone new in the kitchens? I heard the despair in my voice. Mother Laurie's lip curled. No. She glanced back at Marana. Maybe we can blame one of the clients, say that they put a spell on him. Who would you have die for this? Marana's face was without obvious expression, but for the first time I thought I could read it. She bore no love for Mother Laurie. Something boiled beneath the surface between those two, and I was desperate to find out what it was, and if it would be of use to me. Use your magic to find the most likely candidate. Surely you learned that much at Idrinpur. Mother Laurie stood, looming above both of us. Marana's eyes narrowed, and I shifted sideways, moving myself from between them as much as I could. The witch said nothing for a moment, then glanced down at me. She made a gesture and spoke a single word, and the webs shot over my face again faster than I could scream. The world went dark. I do not know how long it was that I sat there or what I might have told them, but when Marana's magic released me, the witch was pulling her hand away from my face. I made myself another promise, that no one would ever use me this way again. Mother Laurie gave me a contemptuous look and turned away, and I turned to stone. Part of me had hoped that I still might be too valuable to sacrifice, But I knew that I was doomed. I must be guilty. I could feel the wetness of tears on my cheek, and I dashed them away. I made myself look at Ren's body, and I wondered why I had killed him. I truly did not know. I didn't ask you that. Marana's voice was cool, indifferent. I flinched, thinking her still in my mind, but then I realized I had spoken the words out loud. That was too much, and I broke down and wept. The women said nothing at first, at least not to me. Mother Laurie hissed something at the witch after a time, but I could not hear it above my own misery. But Marana's next words were a dash of icy water on my pain. I am not the only student at Idrinpur here in the city. They say in the alleys and kitchens that others, even others in this very house, studied there. Perhaps one of them might unravel this mystery. Mother Laurie spat her words. Lies! I do not pay you to gossip, hedge witch. Marana took in a sudden breath and hissed something back at her. There was a sharp snap and a bright flash of light. Marana screamed and dropped to her knees. Her hands went to her throat, and for the first time I could see the silver of a bomb circlet, mate to the one I wore. It smoked under her hands, glowed, then turned black and split open. She dropped forward onto the carpet while Mother Laurie snarled a curse. Her hands moved in an arcane gesture like to the witch's movements. I could feel my jaw fall open. Was Mother Laurie also a student of Idrinpur? The witch looked up and gave me a terrifying smile. I'll be taking back my bond today. You will agree to it if you want my help. I looked from one to the other of them. What was this? Laurie had brought me from the village elders after my parents died of summer fever when I was 13 winters old. It had been 6 long winters at the House of Bliss, 6 winters where I had been trained, beaten when I failed, praised when I did not. I could not say that any of that was sufficient for me to know her. But Marana clearly did. I could see the fear on Mother Laurie's face now, her skin pale as I'd never seen it before. Her hands moved again, this time as if she did not know what she did. Marana laughed, and they went still. Finally, Mother Laurie walked to the door and flung it open. She bellowed for one of the kitchen lads, and when he came, she stepped forward to block his view of the body. I heard the words, guards, and I dried my tears. They would not help me here. At least I could go to my death bravely. I stood up slowly and waited for my fate. Mother Laurie did not look at me, or at Marana. Instead, she looked down at Ren Herat's body for a moment, and then she smiled. It was a triumphant smile, and I wondered what she had to smile about. And then I knew who had poisoned Ren. I met Mother Laurie's eyes as I heard the guards enter. My circlet tightened, closing off my power to speak. I grabbed for it, trying to voice my suspicions. Instead, I felt hard hands on my shoulders and was shoved toward the door. I would die in the Sun Lord's dungeons and no one would hear my screams. Wait. The command behind the voice was enough to stop the guards for a moment. Marana stepped forward. Take her instead. Hers was the hand that felled the Sunborn. Her hands moved, and for a moment I saw webs between them. Mother Laurie screamed and leapt for her throat, but 2 of the guards held her back. The guard captain looked puzzled, even angry. How do you know this? Marana's hands moved toward me, then pulled, and it was my turn to scream. A second self appeared beside me, this time myself as the boy I had been 6 years ago. I looked at younger me and wondered if I could warn him about what was to come, urge him to run up into the mountains to escape his fate. He looked baffled and docile and fixed his eyes on the witch like a puppy. Webs grew over his face a moment later, and I cringed away. Did you put something in the Ser's goblet besides wine? Marana asked. Yes. He answered as if in a dream, and I choked. He was my memory, my former self. If they executed him, what would become of me? Who ordered it? Who called you forth? He pointed at Mother Laurie. The guard captain stared from one to another of us, his face displaying his astonishment. Marana looked at the boy again. Who are you? He pointed this time at me. The witch's eyes pierced me through. Now, did you kill Ser Ren Herath? I looked down at the body and then back at the boy. I was innocent of the crime, but my own innocence now stood before me. There was a hollow place inside me where he had been, and I would be the lesser for it. But I would be alive if I told the truth, and that might be enough. Now, what was the truth? No. I said the word tentatively, as if I was not sure how it would sound in my mouth. Then my mind cleared like it had when Marana's spell was removed. I gestured at the boy. I don't think he killed him either. You said the spell had worn off the goblet, that what remained was old magic? Marana nodded. She reached into her clothes and removed an insignia which she showed to the guard's captain. I was startled to see the lady's sign, such as only priests and priestesses wear. Perhaps she had not been driven from Idrinpur after all. He gave her a shallow bow and stepped back. The goblet contains an old spell, too weak now to kill the Ser. I looked at the boy who had been me. Did you poison the goblet? He looked puzzled. I looked at Marana. Could that old magic have been reactivated by something else? She nodded. So perhaps the poison wasn't what killed him. I shot a glance at Mother Lori. I left you here with him when I went to fetch Marana. You might have... My bond circlet locked tight again and I gasped for air. A moment later there was a flash and Marana's hands yanked it free from my neck. She turned back to Mother Lori. Now, the voice purred, let me show you what I did learn at Idrinpur. The web that came from her hands this time had a foul glint to it, as if it had come from the lady's caves directly. Mother Lori screamed when it touched her, and I looked away, unable to watch. It was over moments later. Marana forced a confession from Mother Lori that Ren Harath would have recovered from the small dose of poison in the goblet, but not from the spell that she used to activate the older magic. The captain picked up the goblet and stared at it warily until Marana made him put it in a silk bag that she stuffed away in her garments. As to the whys of what Mother Lori had done, there followed a tale of intrigue and politics, of which I understood not one word in 10. I had been merely convenient and close to the Ser. There was more, but I ceased to listen. Instead, I studied the boy who I had been, and wondered what I might do to become him again. He seemed happy, free of murder accusations and a life of bondage and bad poetry alike. At last, Mother Lori was done, and the guards took her to the door. Marana followed close behind, and I knew that soon the Ser's servants would come to retrieve his corpse. But what was I supposed to do now? Marana? I could not find the words to ask. She turned and gave me another black-toothed smile. Her hand moved once more, and I nearly fell to my knees as the boy merged back into me. I was whole, and as I remembered, as I touched my neck, free. The thought left me stunned and silent as the witch, the guards, and my former mistress vanished down the stairs. I wondered what the boy I had been would have done. I thought of the western mountains, of dragon's breath and happier times. Then I gathered some coins from the Ser's purse. Not all. I was no thief, so I took only what I needed to go home. Then I stood, stretching out as I felt the years and the weight of bondage drop away. After that, I left the house of bliss to seek myself. So how's everybody doing? Short piece, longer piece?
I think you should read the story for which the world until tonight had not yet been prepared.
Huh? I'm sorry,
The
what?
one that's never been heard before.
There's a lot that's never been heard before.
Where did you get that shirt? Skull.
That is a critical question about my work that I'm really glad somebody asked. It's from a company called Good Goth. I just got a fabulous Edwardian coat from them, but it was too hot to wear tonight. So. Any questions while we're taking a break and I'm drinking water anyway? Clothes, jewelry, hair. Where do I get my ideas? Anything? Oh.
Isn't that what we're supposed to ask?
Huh?
Isn't the last one what we're supposed to ask? What do you get?
You can ask that at the end,
Okay.
because I know you want to.
And
As
the
directed,
answer is
yes.
Schenectady.
The answer is always Schenectady, but sometimes there's more than Schenectady. Sometimes it's like Saratoga and other places too. So. Okay, so why don't I do the novel excerpt, and then we'll see if everybody is still awake and up for another one. So the novel is called The City and the Deaths, and it's a a fantasy novel that I started zillions of years ago, and by which I actually do mean zillions of years ago. Weirdly enough, it's one of the things that my earliest pieces that my wife, who is not a fan and normally does not either read or listen to fantasy, fell madly in love with. And so about once a year she says, "When are you going to finish that?" So I've been moving it up the pile slowly, It's one of the things I wanted to work on. The basic idea is that it's set in a fantasy city where each form of death is personified, because I'm just a little goth. So it's very short, so I'm just going to read the second. This is sort of the equivalent of their CSI in this particular city, in a manner of speaking. Kiersey sat amongst the bones and studied them, caressing each in turn while the candle on the crooked table next to her burned down to a pool of melting wax. The smooth, gleaming white of a femur, the delicate bird-like bones of a hand, the round, spacious curve of a skull. The eye sockets of the one that she held now gazed out into nothing, and she looked at that nothingness with them. Her men, the ones who went out with the wagons to fetch the dead, knew this mood well. They trod cautiously when they brought in the fresh bodies, dumping them in one of the far caverns where they would wait to see if the corpses were claimed. Those with no kin to bury them would be boiled for their bones, soft flesh sliding off into the great iron cauldrons until they gleamed white. Then they would go into the walls of Kiersey's palace. They stripped the bodies first, jewels, coin, cloths, each in a separate pile. The few that they brought in tonight had little to offer. There was a small cloth bag from one, a box wrapped in cloth from another, and clothes from them all. The clothes they kept. Everything else went to Kiersey. She would know what they held back. She always did. All that went unclaimed rested on shelves of bone in Kiersey's room. Ribs cradled grimy metal jewelry, reflecting back the sputtery candles with a sickly green glow. A skull set above her chair wore an embroidered cap that took her fancy. Some toys she wore, some she merely kept to hoard, but all were kept under her watchful eye. The rings of ladies and whores alike wrapped each of her long fingers, and strands of necklaces circled her slim neck, each one of them a memento of the deaths that had found their original owners. Distracted now, her pale eyes rested still on the skull in her left hand. They wandered over the planes of the cheeks, the deep wells of the sockets. What she thought about she did not share, and her men did not think to ask. It was said that one of her earlier assistants, 1 year before them, had presumed upon the light in her clear blue eyes, the innocence glowing in her pale cheeks. His skull hung behind her chair, one long crack running its length. As her current assistants had no wish to join him, they made few inquiries. With an impatient movement, she flung the skull onto the pile of bones beside her throne and rose. With a flurry of black silk cape flying around her shoulders like wings, she stalked from her room and out of the palace's wide gate. Often of late, she walked the sandy streets on moonlit nights, though none could say why with any certainty. It was whispered in the city that she loved one who she could not have, and it was he who she sought under the moon's white light. Her men could not have said yes or no to this, but in fact it was true. Kiersey loved death, but only one of many, and one that was not her own. He was a beautiful death, one with great dark eyes and the music of poetry singing from his lips. She had seen him when he came for her brother, for he was the death that came for beautiful young men, dead before they grew old, killed by small things, little sicknesses, the weakness that followed long after battle wounds. She had seen him when he came for others too, embracing them gently and stealing their souls with a kiss, and she longed to receive the peace that came with his caress. Since he was a kindly death, if such a thing could be, he may have felt some measure of pity for this woman who loved him, but whose death he could not be. He met her sometimes and let her follow him from sickbed to dueling ground, tumbled down hovels to merchant princes' palaces, claiming those whose death he truly was. And the souls came willingly enough, just as Kiersey would have done if she could. They trailed the dark-eyed man and his odd, pale companion until it was time for him to take them and go. and what the two of them spoke of on those walks only they and the souls knew and no other. That night, Kiersey left the Palace of Bones looking for the death that was not her own, holding the small box that came from the last body that her man had brought in. It had a strange pattern on it that rubbed against her palm, prickling her skin. She opened it to find a glass globe inside, one with equally strange markings on it. It seemed to her that it was spilling its secrets to her in tongues that she did not understand. It distracted her to that strange glass with its odd patterns. She was not ready for what happened next. That night, death, one that she did not look for or love, came for Kiersey. It was an impish death riding a steely blade from the shadows as it slipped along the line of red blood that flowed from her slit throat. It was a tiny, cruel death with eyes of green-brown like bad water in the wastes. She hated it, but there she had no choice. It beckoned, and her soul left, and the death of beautiful young men was nowhere to be seen. Terror shook her at the thought that he would not know what had befallen her. She feared that she would never see him again. She wailed her loss as she wove along behind the little hunched figure into the taverns and the festival camps to search for others who had died by the blade that night. But there was no one to hear her, and what remained of her mourned more than the loss of her life. I will say, for the life of me, I don't know why Jana loves this one so much. I mean, I've written, easily 1 million words of fiction at various points, just cumulatively over the years, and for some reason, this is the one. So we'll see. Hopefully next time I'll have a lot more of it.
It seems to be at a reasonable stopping place.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be at a reasonable stopping place.
Well, it's chapter 3, basically. There's a bunch more stuff happens before this, so. And actually, a bunch more stuff does happen after it, so it's underway, but it's about like 30,000, 40,000 words in, so. Okay. Are people up for another piece?
Sure.
Still awake? Except for the people who are leaving. All right, take care. Thank you very much. So there's seats. Everybody wants to sit, there's seats. Just saying. No pressure. You don't have to.
Oh, all right.
Need some help there, Eric?
I'll get there. Put one to sleep.
Old knees are the worst.
Terrible when your leg falls asleep.
Okay. All right, I'm going to get started.
Prince and Needles, man.
The story is called The Prince in Exile. And this is the one that I have not tried reading aloud before, which has never been published. So it does have a glorious history of rejections, because it's one of those things where I worked with for a while, sent it back out, it came back, I looked at it again and went, they're right, it's not quite there, and then I worked with it some more. So it hasn't been out for a while. I revived it for this because I thought it would be interesting to try again. I think it in many ways it was a story I wasn't ready to write when I wrote it, and let's see if I was ready to write it this time around. So, The Prince in Exile. It began like the other stories. Once upon a time there was a prince who lived in a land far away, a land that the prince would one day rule upon the death of her father. But this was not the usual once upon a time story, the kind that grandmothers tell the young ones around the fire. Is it a cautionary tale that laborers tell each other as they toil, or gleaners tell each other as they harvest, the kind that begins and ends with, if only? No, this was a tale with many endings and no moral. But it had one beginning, or so I have heard. It began when the prince met her faithful companion. The prince was a beautiful woman then, with skin the color of gold and hair like liquid fire. Her eyes were bright as the fire's heart, and they consumed those around her to ashes, or so it was said. Certainly it was so for the courtier kneeling before her that day, one Valiant by name. This was not the courtier's original name, of course. That was left behind the day that he met the prince. Valiant was simply the name the prince gave to the kneeling courtier for reasons known only to her. Valiant, so named, looked up and the prince smiled a smile of dragons and nodded. And Valiant took on the name at the same time that he rose and assumed the place of honor at the prince's side, standing just behind the throne. There, the courtier who would become the prince's faithful companion would have remained as the prince became king, at least if all had gone the way of tradition. But then, there would have been no need of an exile, and this tale no different than many in the palace archives. Tradition was rapidly fleeing these distant lands even as these events transpired. Still, the changes were long in coming to the prince's kingdom, at least by comparison with the countries that surrounded it. One by one, their rulers bowed to the call for parliaments and constitutions, or stepped down in favor of new rulers, or met untimely, unseemly ends. But in the prince's kingdom, the old ways held on. Why do we need a constitution when our kings are bound by magic to the land and become a part of it? It is the law, and without accepting it, they may not wear the crown, the people said. Or so they said for a time. But the new ways came despite all that, sweeping all before them. The king died, the prince and her followers, valiant among them, fought fiercely to hold on to what they thought was theirs. They grasped for what they had always known, what seemed a part of them. The blood ran in rivers in the capital, and the battles were the fiercest the land had ever seen. But in the end it was not enough, and Valiant's prince went into hiding with Valiant at her side. There were others who rode with them at first, for the lure of even broken power carries with it the promise of more power to come. The prince and her followers rode into the mountains to the last few royal strongholds. There, hope dwindled. Many of the prince's followers fell away, and the loyal lords became less hospitable until finally the prince surrendered to the finality of exile. She rode away beyond the boundaries of what had been her kingdom and the essence of what she had been. By then, only Valiant rode at her side. The remainder of her people had fallen away in a series of unsuccessful plots. In the worst cases, their heads now adorned the walls of the prince's former palace. The new leaders had a dim view of princes and those who pledged their allegiance to them. Soon, even the mountain lords took the hint, and there would have been no sanctuary for them had they stayed. But it was in the land beyond the mountains that everything began to change. As I've said before, the kings of the prince's land were bound to it, sharing its joys and pains, its health and sickness. Some rulers were bound more tightly to it than others, and the connection ebbed and flowed over the course of their lives, but none of these rulers had ever been exiled. Leaving the land seemed to uproot something in Valiant's prince, tearing her loose from her foundations until she seemed a creature of air rather than fire. That first night beyond the mountains, Valiant made camp for them in a quiet glade in the great woods at the edge of the world. When they went to sleep on the seventh night, the prince was as she had always been. But by morning, there was a new prince at Valiant's side. Overnight, she had transformed into a beautiful boy. Where she had been curved, now he was lean and well-muscled from riding, though his eyes and hair were still flame-colored. He smiled at Valiant as he woke, a quiet smile, with no hint of dragons. Then he stood and took the horses down to the stream to drink. Valiant gaped after him, his mind a-whirl. It was as if he saw his prince again for the first time, and that one small gesture recaptured his heart. Clearly, more had changed than the prince's outward shape. When they first fled the court, the prince had been willing enough to let Valiant tend to the horses and to the minute details of their exile. That began to change as they traveled. The prince occasionally fetched provisions, bargained with farmers, and did other unprincely things. But the fire, the joy that she'd shown in court and battle died away as she got further from their lost kingdom. And with it died some of Valiant's enthusiasm for both her and her cause. Valiant still remembered what the prince had been, and his loyalty to that was unswerving, if more detached. It grieved him to see the prince unhappy. He realized that the smile of dragons had vanished and longed with all his heart to see it again. Even when they finally became lovers, the prince was sad and distant. And they did become lovers, how could they not? Each was each other's last piece of home, other than what they carried inside themselves. They found some joy in each other's bodies, learning to please more than either had been made to do before they were fallen. But it was not enough to make them fall in love, not in first. Until now. Valiant watched the youth who was his prince with a white-hot passion he had never felt before. The prince smiled at Valiant, the expression a mere shadow of its former glory, but Valiant could see at once that he was not loved in return, at least not as he longed for, and his was not a heart that could accept such an outcome. He set out to win the prince's love as they traveled. At first he courted him as a man courts a woman, but to no avail. Then he courted him as a man courts a man. They hunted, they wrestled, they kissed. Still, there was no love, only deep affection in the prince's eyes. Then the prince took another lover, a beautiful buxom countrywoman who ran an inn that sheltered them first for one night, then more. Soon the prince worked serving ale while Valiant toiled in the stables. The inn became something like a home, despite Valiant's longing for something more, something greater. He remembered the court and the glory of their kingdom, though he and his prince no longer spoke of it. He missed their past, though the prince seemed to be adapting to their new life. Too, Valiant was also not ready to surrender all hope of gaining his prince's heart. With that as his chief desire, he studied the innkeeper, learning her body and her gestures. Sometimes she took him to her bed so that he could study her more closely. She knew that he loved the prince as she did, but the prince did not truly love her either, so she and Valiant had much in common. The inn prospered, many with their hearts broken over a pint when the prince served it to him with his merry, distant smile. Others longed for a horse if they had none, that they might bring it to the stables in order to see the handsome man who worked there. And for a time, the prince and his companion were happy after a fashion. Then, the prince began to change again, rooting themselves in the changing seasons and the shifting earth rather than the land of their birth as they had known it. Valiant had never seen anything like this before. He did not cease to love his prince, and he continued to hope that his love would be someday enough, regardless of their form. But now he feared how the villagers might respond when they saw the changes in the prince. Besides, the prince was not alone in transforming. Valiant had begun to change as well. At first he thought at the pangs of exile, the upheaval of dislocation setting alight his fevered imagination. But when he caught a glimpse of himself in the innkeeper's murky mirror one morning, he realized that it was something more. His cheeks were softening, his beard shrinking, and beneath his hands he felt the beginnings of breaths. At first they turned away, unable to accept what was happening to their form, turning the mirror to the wall. They told themselves that it was but a waking dream, and they bound their budding breasts, refusing to acknowledge the changes. It did no good, of course. Soon the innkeeper spoke openly of the transformations she saw in them both, and what others had begun to notice. Both prince and companion knew that while she might come to accept them in time, they could not risk waiting. So they left in secret one night, the prince, who was now neither man nor woman, but something new, and their transformed companion Valiant. They spoke of riding back to the mountains, to the lands where they were born. They had been gone some years, so they thought it was likely no one would recognize them, especially as they were now, but both feared to return without the power they had once known. How could their land be their home if they did not rule it? In the end, they feared that there was no going back without an army, not if they wished to return to what they had been. So instead, they rode until they came to the greatest city beyond the mountains. There they found work in the shops and inns, always away from the sight of others who might fear their changing bodies. And the prince took their companion to their bed once more, and Valiant was happier than she had been since their exile. Her body changed with her happiness, beard becoming but a memory as she shifted into a strong woman's curves that melted against her prince's new form at night after a hard day in the markets or the shops. But the prince still didn't love Valiant, and Valiant despaired, thinking that perhaps a prince could never love a companion, regardless of their forms. Somehow she must become the prince's equal. She began to dream of being something more. The prince seemed to have found their new form, settling into a beautiful flame-eyed person that combined characteristics of both man and woman. Valiant watched the end of these changes come with a pang and realized that she had delighted in watching the prince transform, in imagining that only she would remain at their side no matter how changed they were. If there were no more changes and the prince was no longer a prince, what need was there for a Valiant? Valiant also found that she loved the prince a little less when she remembered what they had been. It was as if Valiant needed that fire to keep herself warm, and she was growing cold. These thoughts began to weigh on Valiant's mind until she thought about nothing else. Her life had been her prince's to do with as they pleased. What was it now? She had been a warrior and a courtier, and such doubts were new and alien to her. They felt disloyal and unclean. What right had she to judge how her prince had dealt with loss? Finally, when she could stand her worries no more, Valiant began to sneak out to the edge of the city with her prince's sword. She practiced the long-forgotten moves and dances of the blade that she had learned in her previous life. She read, too, something she had not done in years, haunting the bookseller's stands in the markets and working for the privilege of reading the books. Sometimes, when the prince was not in their room, Valiant practiced her smile in the mirror. She mimicked her prince's walk as she remembered it, her regal gestures as she recalled them. She bathed in her memories of the prince as she had been, as though they were fine, perfumed waters. And she remembered power as they had known it. The hole inside her began to fill once more. Perhaps there was one more transformation they might both embrace. The day came when Valiant woke to find the prince looking directly into her eyes. "You've changed again," they said in their mellifluous voice, and Valiant looked down at her body expecting to find a new one, but she was the same as she had been the night before. She looked at her prince for some indication of what had changed, and saw only the beautiful face of her companion. It made her smile, that face, and she released her long hair from its braid, spilling its flame-red length over her shoulders. She stretched, muscles tensing beneath golden skin. Then she saw her eyes in the little mirror, eyes the color of the fire's heart stared back at her. Valiant looked at her companion and smiled a dragon's smile. The new prince rose and dressed, with her new companion, once a prince, at her side. "It's time to go home, Valiant," she said softly, and her companion nodded and moved to stand at the place of honor just behind her. The prince could feel her land calling her back, its voice thrumming beneath her skin until she could hear nothing else, and there was only one way she wanted to return. So she went to the taverns and the camps, gathering an army, drawing warriors to her as if they could not help themselves, could not deny her smile. When they were ready, she rode out of the city and back toward the mountains, and all the while her new companion rode at her side and was all that a true courtier should be. And the prince was all that Valiant had ever loved as they returned from exile.
Now, I'll bet if you buy these books from Alice, I'll bet that Catherine would send them to you.
It's true. Now you can ask the questions like, where do I get my ideas? So I can look at you blankly and go, I have honestly no frickin' idea. The shower, mostly.
You can ask that question.
How do you get your ideas from life?
Huh?
Get your ideas from life, from what you're doing.
I think I get my ideas from avoiding life as much as I possibly can.
What inspires you?
Mhm.
What inspires you?
To become a writer?
Right on.
Well, I was in law school, and I am not temperamentally suited for law school. We start there. So I'd never written any fiction at all until I was in my early 30s. And I used to have my own bookstore, as a matter of fact, in Iowa. And I ran out of money, got walking pneumonia, and needed to close the bookstore. And so I did what you do at that point, which is, of course, go to law school, because who doesn't do that, you know? And so while I was in law school, we discovered that absolute misery made me telekinetic. And I would walk into the kitchen and dishes would slide off the countertop and shatter and glasses would break and everything. It was really, really hard on the kitchenware for a while. And I was only in one accelerated semester. And my wife, who was then my partner at the time, suggested that I try writing a piece of nonfiction. And I sat down and started writing a piece. I originally started a book that was actually about bookstores. And I read a really bad piece of fiction that week, and my reaction to it was, I could do better than this. So I sat down, I wrote my first ever short story. Again, had never written any fiction before. I wrote it, I sent it out, it got accepted, and Alicia Austin, who's a very famous fantasy artist, did the cover art for the magazine based on my story.
Whoa.
The next day, I walked into law school clutching that magazine and said, I'm done! And they said, can we call it a withdrawal instead of dropping out? And that way, if you change your mind, you can come back. And I said, yeah, we can do that. So technically speaking, if at any moment the rest of my life doesn't work out, I can go back to law school again. So not happening. So that was kind of how it all started. And then I wrote for a couple of small newspapers and wrote for a bunch of anthologies, and after a while reached the happy place where editors were soliciting work from me, and kind of went on from there. So, what you got, Conrad?
Which is your favorite story of yours?
Of these three?
Of all of the things you've
Oh,
written?
of everything I've written? You know, so many of them are my favorites while I'm in the moment.
Mm.
You know, I have stuff that won't let go of me, and I find that when I go back through things, I often get new ideas. So when I was working on Mother Laurie's House of Bliss, it was a one-off. I just threw in a bunch of world-building stuff, and I never meant to go back to it. So of course, when I was revising it this week, I'm like, why was this a one-off? I could do more stuff with this. So I may go back and revisit that one. You know, there's a couple of things that, you know, have been in various stages of progress. I wrote at a novel published a couple of years ago about a woman who changes into a werewolf as she enters menopause. And there's a second book to that. I'm still working on that. But there's like weird stuff. Like I started this Regency about the Fae trying to stop the Industrial Revolution. And every now and then I go back and look at that again. So I think, you know, the other factor is also, you know, what you end up using for performance purposes and what you end up reading from. Because frankly, there are stories of mine that I've read so many bloody times I'm sick of them, and I can recognize them that they were little gems in their time, but I'm done with them now.
It's your free bird.
Kind of, you know, they can go back into the jewel box and stay there, and I'm okay with that. And then there's other stuff that it's like, man, this was a great idea, I should have done more with it. So I finished, one of Jana's other favorite books of mine that was in progress for a long time was based on a novella that I had published, and that was the other one. She kept saying go back and revisit that. So I actually finished that novel last year, and I'm doing revisions to it now. So, but that'll appear under Other Me's name, and it's a totally different kind of book. Other Me is Emily Byrne. So, you know, any great desire to see what, you know, the latest fascinating erotica I'm cranking out, that's all under Emily Byrne now. And the reason for that was that when I started writing, I was temping and nobody gave a crap what I did. And then Google came along, and I work in IT. And so after the magical moment on a project a few years ago, where one of the developers I worked with trotted up to my cube with a collection of vampire erotica, held it out to me at work and said, "Can you sign this for me?" Like, name change. This is such an HR moment. I don't even have words. Okay. So I started spitting off another me who's doing, you know, a different kind of work. So that's erotica, erotic romance, and some of the more, you know, romance-heavy stuff. So.
Have you ever gotten in trouble with HR because of that? They're able to figure out that's just a story.
Well, nobody complained.
Yeah.
However, the day would probably come when somebody would in fact complain. So I'm just trying to forestall that. Yeah, I worked out a project once where the developer actually ran off the jacket cover of a book that I had a story in and put it up in his cube because he wanted to tell people he knew a real writer. Thanks, dude.
Hey, it's prestigious, right?
You know, it was meant well, but it was definitely one of those things that was just not going to mix with the corporate culture. What else you got?
So you're going to dress up in character for readings by Emily Byrne? Missed opportunity.
Yeah, we're not going down that road. Yeah, I mean, you know, Emily Byrne is an open pseudonym, so I'm not claiming Emily as anybody else, and so, no.
I don't know, I think you could do the librarian look, you know, perfect.
I could, but too many people already know me, so it's just, it's best if the cult of personality just embraces Emily too.
You use gender and sexuality in a really fluid way in the work. I really like that. Where do you see your work as part of a political discourse, and where do you see it as more a personal discourse for you? How do you balance that?
That's a good question. Well, I identify as bisexual, and I first, you know, I started writing in the 90s, and at that point, there were a few big names that wrote in science fiction and fantasy who were out and queer. You know, Samuel Delaney and you know, a couple of other, you know, Melissa Scott and so forth. And they were doing really interesting work. And that was the path that I wanted to follow. And there were, at that point in time, there were still a number of feminist and queer specialty stores, bookstores, small presses, book clubs. There was a whole kind of ecosystem that was built up. This is before Amazon and before, you know, Barnes and Noble and Borders, you know, expanded all over the place. When I started writing, there were 165 feminist bookstores in the world. There are now less than 20. The number of queer bookstores is now, well, I wrote the Wikipedia article on it, and there were 10, let's put it that way. So some of it was that I wanted to write things that were, you know, reflective of my reality. And I wasn't finding a lot of that, because a lot of the queer genre press stuff is very heavy on romance. Like unbelievably heavy on romance. It's kind of like 99% romance, 0.5% erotica, and 0.5 everything else. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to play with the kind of things that I saw Elizabeth Lynn doing, or Melissa Scott, or Laurie Marks, or some of the authors that I had imprinted on when I was, you know, first getting into fandom. And so it's not so much that I think about it as political discourse as I wanted to try it. So I wrote a coming out novel about a middle-aged woman who becomes a werewolf at menopause, partially because there are so many narratives about female werewolves that tie it to first menses. You have to be young if you're going to be a female werewolf. And I was also reading some really appalling medical articles about women in menopause. Unexpected hair growth, mood swings, you know? Hair growing from unexpected places. I'm like, well, you know what that sounds like. So some of it was that I also wanted to talk about aging. And it's been really interesting how that's come about. I've actually, some of you who follow me on Facebook know about this already, but I was just asked to speak at a university class in November about some of the work that I've been doing on depictions of aging in science fiction. And I started doing a bibliography of older women who were protagonists in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And when I started, we came up with about 20 names, you know, and everybody would trot out, you know, Paladin of Souls. He's like, yes, we already got that one. Next. And now it's grown into, it's a multi-part thing. And it's, you know, it's getting almost to be too much to keep up with, which is really kind of cool. And some of that is, of course, that the writers in the field are getting a little older. But it's an interesting thing to play with that wasn't there before. And so I think that, you know, while my ideas are certainly inspired by the political situation, which I find myself, that's not my primary inspiration. It's more of a, ooh, there's an idea, I want to do something with that. And then I kind of go from there. So the answer to where I get my ideas is kind of like everywhere, but in a more consolidated way. I do not, for example, generally write novels about IT. I tried, and it just...
Thank you.
We should probably move to reception.
We could probably do that. Anything else? Okay. I made reservations at Parkway Pizza, which is over on Minnehaha, which is usually where we go after these, and everyone's welcome to join us.
44th and Minnehaha.
That was 34th and Minnehaha, if you didn't catch that.
44th.
44th and Minnehaha. No wonder I can never find it.
34th,
I think 38th Street is still closed going directly across, so you do have to go down to 42nd and then around. But thank you all very much for coming tonight.